Most men misunderstand the moment their relationships begin to feel distant. They assume something has gone wrong. They assume they have become cold, cynical, detached, or incapable of connection. Yet what often happens is something far more unsettling. They have not lost the capacity to connect. They have lost the capacity to pretend. There is a difference. One is emotional damage. The other is psychological evolution. Carl Jung understood this distinction better than most thinkers because he spent his life studying the hidden movements of the psyche, the invisible transformations that occur long before behavior changes on the surface. The tragedy is that these transformations rarely announce themselves. They arrive quietly. One day you simply realize that conversations which once captivated you now feel unbearably shallow. Dynamics that once felt exciting now feel repetitive. You find yourself sitting across from someone attractive, intelligent, socially admired, and yet internally you feel nothing but distance. Not because she lacks value, because your consciousness has traveled somewhere your old desires cannot easily follow. Jung once observed in his private seminars that psychological growth creates a crisis of participation. What he meant was profound. Most people participate in life unconsciously. They inherit desires without questioning them. They inherit ambitions without examining them. They inherit definitions of love, success, masculinity, and femininity from the surrounding culture and spend decades acting them out as if they originated from within. But individuation, Jung's central psychological idea, destroys this unconscious participation. It forces a man to ask dangerous questions. Why am I attracted to this person? What exactly am I seeking? Is it love, admiration, validation, comfort, or merely relief from loneliness? The more honestly he investigates these questions, the more his former attractions begin to unravel. What once looked like connection begins revealing itself as unconscious need. This is why many intelligent men eventually experience a strange form of grief. They are not grieving a particular woman. They are grieving an entire psychological world. A world where attraction felt simple. A world where beauty alone seemed meaningful. A world where emotional excitement could still be mistaken for compatibility. Jung understood that every man carries within him an inner feminine image which he called the anima. Most men never become conscious of it. Instead, they project it onto women they encounter. They do not see the woman herself. They see the reflection of their own unconscious longing. They become enchanted not by reality, but by symbolism. The woman becomes a screen onto which the psyche projects its unfinished desires, its wounds, its hopes, its hunger for completion. The danger begins when a man starts withdrawing these projections. This is one of the least discussed aspects of Jung's work. Most people know about projection. Few understand what happens when projection ends. Suddenly the magic disappears, the obsession weakens, the fantasy collapses, the emotional intoxication fades. For the first time, he sees people as they actually are rather than as carriers of his unconscious dreams. And what follows is often disappointing, not because women have changed, but because illusion has disappeared. The psyche can no longer manufacture fascination from unconscious need. Reality takes the place of fantasy, and reality is far less dramatic than desire. There is a hidden loneliness attached to this stage of development. A loneliness few men can discuss openly because society misunderstands it completely. Others assume he has become arrogant. They assume he thinks he is better than everyone else. But superiority has nothing to do with it. In fact, the deeper truth is often the opposite. The individuated man becomes painfully aware of his own flaws. He has spent enough time confronting his shadow to understand how fragile human beings really are. What changes is not his humility. What changes is his tolerance for unconsciousness. He can no longer participate comfortably in dynamics that require self-deception. He cannot unknow what he now knows. Jung wrote something remarkable in a lesser-known correspondence. He suggested that many relationships survive not because two people understand one another, but because neither person understands themselves. Think carefully about the implications. If two unconscious people meet, their illusions often fit together perfectly. One projects strength, the other projects admiration. One projects rescue, the other projects helplessness. One projects certainty, the other projects dependence. The relationship functions because both individuals are interacting with fantasies rather than realities. But when one person becomes conscious, the entire structure begins to shake. Awareness destabilizes arrangements that were built upon illusion. This is why some men eventually realize they have outgrown not specific women, but entire patterns of relating. They no longer feel compelled to rescue. They no longer feel compelled to impress. They no longer feel compelled to prove their worth through sacrifice. And without these unconscious motivations, many interactions lose their emotional charge. What once felt profound now feels predictable. What once felt romantic now feels psychologically transparent. The individuated man begins seeing the machinery beneath the performance. He notices how often attraction is confused with dependency. He notices how frequently affection is exchanged for validation. He notices how many people seek relationships not to encounter another soul, but to escape themselves. The collective culture rarely prepares men for this realization because modern society profits from psychological immaturity. Entire industries depend upon insecurity. Entire social systems depend upon emotional dependence. A man who has learned to sit comfortably within himself becomes difficult to manipulate. He purchases less fantasy. He seeks less approval. He becomes less vulnerable to emotional coercion. Jung believed that genuine consciousness always creates separation from the collective. Not because consciousness makes you special, but because most social structures are built around unconscious motivations. The more conscious you become, the harder it becomes to participate in games that everyone else still mistakes for reality. What unsettles many men is that this transformation often changes how they experience female attention itself. Validation that once felt intoxicating begins feeling strangely empty. Compliments lose their power. Flirtation loses its novelty. Pursuit loses its excitement. At first this feels alarming. He wonders whether something is broken inside him. Yet what is actually disappearing is not his ability to love. It is his addiction to being psychologically completed by another person. These are very different things. One is dependence disguised as romance. The other is the beginning of genuine freedom. And freedom, contrary to popular belief, is not immediately joyful. Jung understood this better than most. Freedom often arrives carrying loss. Loss of certainty, loss of fantasy, loss of belonging, loss of familiar emotional patterns. The man begins standing in territory where few people can accompany him, because most people still organize their lives around unconscious needs he has spent years dismantling. This is why the path of individuation frequently feels isolating, not because consciousness separates you from humanity, but because it separates you from collective illusions. And once those illusions collapse, there is no path back to innocence. There is only the difficult task of learning how to live in truth. The deeper a man travels into self-awareness, the more he begins noticing a phenomenon Jung rarely discussed publicly, but hinted at repeatedly throughout his writings. The psyche does not merely outgrow people, it outgrows certain emotional economies. Every relationship operates according to an invisible exchange. Sometimes the exchange is obvious, sometimes it is hidden beneath years of affection and familiarity. Yet beneath almost every connection lies an unconscious transaction. One person provides certainty, another provides admiration, one supplies emotional stability, another supplies validation. These exchanges are not inherently evil, they are part of human nature. The problem arises when a man becomes conscious enough to recognize them. What once felt natural now appears mechanical. What once felt spontaneous now reveals itself as a pattern repeated across different faces and different years. Many men never discover this because they remain trapped within what Jung called participation mystique, the unconscious fusion between the individual and the surrounding world. In this state, a person cannot distinguish between their own desires and the desires implanted by society. They pursue what everyone else pursues. They admire what everyone else admires. They desire what everyone else desires. But the individuated man eventually begins asking a forbidden question. What if my attraction has been shaped by forces that have nothing to do with my authentic self? What if much of what I called love was merely social conditioning, dressed in romantic language? The answer is often disturbing because it forces him to examine years of choices he once considered deeply personal. One of Jung's most overlooked insights was that human beings are often attracted not to health, but to familiarity. This changes everything. Most people imagine they are seeking happiness. In reality, they are frequently seeking psychological repetition. The psyche gravitates toward what it already understands, even when what it understands is painful. This explains why certain relationships feel instantly magnetic. The attraction is not necessarily evidence of compatibility. It may be evidence of recognition. Something within the unconscious recognizes an old wound, an old dynamic, an old emotional script, and mistakes familiarity for destiny. Many men spend years pursuing women who activate ancient psychological patterns without realizing that what feels profound is often simply familiar suffering. As consciousness expands, these patterns become impossible to ignore. The man begins noticing that many interactions follow remarkably similar structures, different personalities, different appearances, different backgrounds. Yet beneath the surface, the same emotional choreography repeats itself, the same need for validation, the same power struggles, the same insecurities disguised as confidence, the same dependency disguised as affection. At first, this realization feels cynical. Later, it becomes liberating, because once a pattern is seen clearly, it loses much of its unconscious power. Awareness breaks enchantment. This is one of the hidden laws of psychology Jung spent his life exploring. The collective narrative teaches men that maturity means becoming better at relationships. Jung's perspective was more unsettling. He believed maturity often requires becoming less dependent upon relationships for psychological completion. These are not the same thing. One concerns social skill, the other concerns inner freedom. A man can become extraordinarily successful with women while remaining psychologically immature. He can attract attention, admiration, affection, and still be governed entirely by unconscious needs. Conversely, a man may appear detached from the social game while possessing a level of psychological integration that few people ever achieve. Society confuses these two forms of development because it measures visible success more easily than inner transformation. There comes a stage where the individuated man notices something strange about attention itself. He begins observing how desperately many people seek to be seen, not understood, not known, simply seen. Visibility becomes a substitute for significance. This is not limited to women. It is a universal human phenomenon. Yet in modern culture, where identity is increasingly constructed through external feedback, the hunger for recognition has reached extraordinary levels. Jung warned repeatedly that the unexamined ego will seek inflation through any available means. Attention becomes proof of value. Desire becomes proof of worth. Admiration becomes proof of existence. And because most people never question these assumptions, they spend their lives chasing reflections instead of substance. The psychologically awakened man gradually loses interest in this pursuit, not because he is incapable of appreciating beauty or affection, but because he begins recognizing the difference between nourishment and stimulation. Stimulation excites the nervous system. Nourishment strengthens the soul. Many relationships provide endless stimulation while offering almost no nourishment. They generate drama, excitement, uncertainty, emotional highs and lows. Yet beneath the intensity, there is little growth, little truth, little transformation. Jung observed that the psyche is often seduced by intensity because intensity creates the illusion of meaning. But meaning and intensity are not identical. Some of the most meaningful experiences in life arrive quietly, without spectacle, without excitement, without applause. This realization often creates an unexpected distance between the awakened man and many women he once found fascinating. He begins noticing how frequently conversations revolve around external realities rather than inner realities. Status, appearance, social dynamics, validation, reputation, approval. None of these subjects are inherently trivial. Yet to a man who has spent years confronting the architecture of his own psyche, they can begin feeling strangely incomplete. He finds himself longing for something rarer, not intelligence alone, not beauty alone, not charisma alone. He seeks consciousness. He seeks someone who has traveled into the depths of themselves and returned with wisdom rather than merely opinions. Jung believed that every individual possesses hidden dimensions they spend their lives avoiding. The tragedy is that most people never descend deeply enough to encounter them. They remain trapped on the surface of their own personalities. They know their preferences, but not their motivations. They know their desires, but not their origins. They know their emotions, but not their sources. The individuated man develops an almost instinctive sensitivity to this distinction. He can feel when someone speaks from genuine self-knowledge and when they speak from borrowed identities. He can sense the difference between authenticity and performance. And once that sensitivity develops, many interactions begin feeling emotionally hollow, regardless of how socially impressive they appear. This is where the real challenge begins, because the temptation is to become resentful. The temptation is to judge. The temptation is to conclude that everyone else is asleep while you alone are awake. Jung considered this one of the most dangerous traps on the path of consciousness. The ego can easily convert awareness into superiority. It can transform wisdom into vanity. It can convince a man that his psychological growth places him above others. But genuine individuation produces the opposite effect. The deeper you travel into your own shadow, the less interested you become in condemning others. You understand too clearly the chaos hidden within every human being, including yourself. The truth is not that you have become better than most women. The truth is far more complicated and far more painful. You have become incompatible with certain levels of consciousness. You have become incompatible with dynamics that once sustained you. You have become incompatible with illusions that once felt necessary. This is not a victory, it is a responsibility, because once you see clearly, you can no longer return to blindness. You can only continue moving forward into deeper levels of understanding, even when that journey leaves you standing alone more often than before. And perhaps this is the final lesson Jung would want every intelligent man to understand. The goal was never to become admired. It was never to become desired. It was never even to become understood by everyone around you. The goal was to become whole. And wholeness demands sacrifices that the collective mind rarely celebrates. It demands that you abandon fantasies that once comforted you. It demands that you release identities that once protected you. It demands that you stop searching for yourself inside the approval, affection, and attention of other people. Many men spend their entire lives believing that fulfillment waits somewhere outside them, in the next relationship, in the next conquest, in the next person who finally understands them. But Jung spent decades exploring the unconscious and arrived at a far more unsettling conclusion. What you seek outside yourself is often a fragmented piece of yourself demanding integration. The more unconscious you are, the more desperately you search for completion in others. The more conscious you become, the more you realize that no woman, no relationship, and no external validation can substitute for the work of becoming yourself. This is why you must accept that you have outgrown many women, not with arrogance, not with bitterness, and certainly not with contempt. Accept it with the same calmness that a tree accepts the falling of old leaves. Growth is not an accusation against the past. It is simply evidence that life continues moving forward. Some people were companions for a season of your development. Some were mirrors that reflected wounds you needed to heal. Some revealed weaknesses you needed to confront. And some entered your life only to teach you that not every connection is meant to last forever. The deepest form of maturity is realizing that your journey was never about finding someone to complete you. It was about becoming someone who no longer requires completion. It was about meeting the parts of yourself you once abandoned. It was about descending into your own darkness and returning with wisdom instead of fear. It was about becoming strong enough to stand alone without becoming lonely, and becoming self-aware enough to love without becoming dependent. So if you find yourself feeling distant from the people who once felt essential, do not rush to interpret that distance as failure. Sometimes distance is not loss. Sometimes distance is evidence that your consciousness has traveled beyond an old psychological landscape. Sometimes the loneliness you feel is merely the space required for a new version of yourself to emerge. And if that is where you are today, keep walking. Do not betray your growth to regain familiarity. Do not shrink your awareness to recover acceptance. Do not trade authenticity for belonging, because there is something far more valuable than being understood by everyone. It is understanding yourself. And once a man truly understands himself, the world loses much of its power to confuse him. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with another man who is walking the difficult path of self-discovery. And if you wish to support the channel and help us continue creating these deep philosophical explorations, you'll find the support link in the description below. Until next time, continue the journey inward, because the greatest mystery you will ever uncover is the one that has been living inside you all along.